I was looking at your LinkedIn and I saw that you started off studying your bioengineering major
Yep, bioengineering at UCSD. Yeah.
and you transitioned from that to playtesting some video games. And I was wondering if there was any issues you ran into that with that from, family or, even friends or, people who are pressuring you to go back to engineering, or if there's anything like that where people were like, "Oh, go for it," if it wasn't even a big deal for you.
Well, I think, probably my experience is maybe a little bit different than people's experience nowadays, just because, back in the early 90s, the game industry was, it was all pretty new. It was not very big. And so, I mean, for the most part, like my dad was unhappy. Um, because so the playtesting job was a summer job.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was not until I became a producer, project manager in '93, towards the end of '93, really right at the end of '93, where I sort of I said I was not going to go back to school.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was particularly frustrating for him, just because I really only had about three classes to go.
Mm.
Um, and so,
Yeah.
and I think, and they were all, they were all it was two engineering electives and like one just other like elective. So it wasn't even like my core classes. I'd actually finished all my bioengineering core classes. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, he was frustrated, but I think over time, I mean, in his mind, he had this concept that like engineers, getting out of school made a good salary,
Yeah.
and I would say the first couple years, my salary at Interplay was not what it would have been as a starting engineer. But by the third year or so, we were talking, and I kind of told him what I was making, and then he was like, "Well, you made a good choice, because you're obviously enjoying what you're doing. You're having a lot of
Mm-hmm.
fun. You're hanging out with your friends, and money wise, was very similar. So yeah, that was it. I mean, other than that, there was no real. I mean, it was my early 20s. My friends were, in the most part, actually all working at Interplay.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, no, I mean, it was just my dad. And, after a couple of years, and he could see that it was actually an actual legitimate thing to do,
Mm-hmm.
then he was cool.
Yeah, because I was just thinking, especially 90s and even earlier, there's a lot of stories of people who followed a similar track to you, I guess I'll say, where they
Hmm.
said, I'm just going to quit school and I'm going to go into video games. And of course, we only hear about the success stories, right? But,
Right.
there's a lot of stories where people did that and everyone around them was like, why would you do that? That's insane. This is a stupid industry. It's just
Yeah.
like kids do this stuff or, the rambunctious youth, I guess.
Well, and I think also, I mean, it has, not to tangent too much. I think it's an ongoing misunderstanding of sort of the business of the industry, in which there's people, like, whenever I talk to people about like what games cost and what games can make,
Mm-hmm.
still to this day they're very surprised. And so, and back then it was just even there were people were even more ignorant of kind of what it was as a business. And I
Yeah.
think that just led people to thinking it was just being, you were silly if you went and did it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Um, and so because I mean, I watched your talk at Krakow about
Oh, okay, yeah.
yeah, about, your experiences in the industry, and I thought that was really interesting. But you mentioned that, you were talking about some of the difficulties that you face in the industry, just with miscommunication and everything like that. And I think that having a good attitude and being on top of everything is, of course, imperative in any industry. But it seems like in the game industry, it's vital, or else you can really just fall out of the industry. You can really burn out unless you have, you know, a good attitude, fortitude towards your work and everything. So I'm wondering, you mentioned the concept of kaizen in Japanese culture, which I
Hmm.
myself am also half Japanese, so I'm
Gotcha.
familiar with that. And is there anything else aside from what you mentioned in that talk at Krakow that you carry with yourself, or any kind of rituals, like even something silly like, oh, I look in the mirror in the morning and I tell myself I look beautiful, something like, something as stupid as that. Do you do anything like that that you think has helped you stay sane in this industry in a sense?
I mean, maybe I mean, a lot of it is I think all of us as we are in business, or just life, there's things that you do, and I mean, I don't even know if they're rituals or stuff like that. But like there's certain things in business that I think have made my life easier, from the standpoint that I've tried to kind of help other people see, even going back to the first people, some of the first people I managed. There's certain things like I remember one of the first producers I managed, I kind of told him something that I'd figured out pretty early on in my career, which is the minute you don't want to make a phone call is the minute you have to make the phone call.
Right, right.
And because that just means you're just putting off something. So I'm a big person. I procrastinate in my personal life like anybody else, and I procrastinate in my business life to an extent. But I think a lot of it is that's one of the core things I try not to do is I really try to prioritize the right things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what's helped me stay sane is I try to do that. I think the other thing that keeps me sane in the industry is that, while I'm a studio head, I run the staff is, we have about 185 people at Obsidian right now, and working on a number of projects. And I think that could make you go crazy if you kind of focused on the mistakes. I've made mistakes that have cost millions of dollars and cost people jobs, and I've said the wrong thing or have done this or whatever. And I think the only other thing that I try to one of the other big things I try to do is yesterday was yesterday and today is today, right? And I can't fix yesterday, and I try to help a lot of other people see this too. I can't fix yesterday, but I can try to make today a better day, and I can try to make us be a better developer and make better products today. Mm-hmm. And then I tie that into the other concept, which, actually, I'm going to sit down with one of our new managers today and give her this advice, which is, I could see she's getting a little scattered and this is kind of new to her. And I just said, I could do 1,000 different things. If I look at my to-do list, there's probably, I don't know, I have like 1,000 emails in my inbox right now because I'm a little bit behind. And I probably have 150 things on my to-do list. But the thing that I ask myself every morning, when I'm being good, of course, I'm not this perfect person, but I do remember to do this for quite often, which is what is the one thing that I could do today that would help the company the most? And the thing I'm going to tell her is, what is the one thing you can do today that will help your project the most? And I guess that's a ritual, I guess, in a certain ways. But it's clarifying. It's this idea of like, you really try to think about like, okay, because it's not always obvious. It's not always a big thing. It's not always a small thing. But it's just like, if I did this, I took this person to lunch, right? Mm-hmm. It sounds silly, but they are those kind of things. It's not just big decisions. And maybe that's how I look at it as a cross. I'm not all about big decisions. I'm about like what is really the best thing, and trying to understand, trying to figure that out. And over time, I guess I've refined my ability to see what is the right thing to do at any one point in time.
Yeah, I definitely think that kind of attitude is something that is important to keep about yourself, to keep on top of everything. And I remember in the Krakow talk, you mentioned also that communicate in the game industry about the tools often. Like, I think it was a Scott Everett paradox that you
the
right?
Scott Everett's paradox.
Yeah. And you said one of the most important things is to always communicate with others. Do you think it's simply about just the communication that's important? As you said, the moment you don't want to email someone, that's the moment you've lost or you're falling behind.
Yeah. I think for me, I think another way to look at it is really this idea of just don't make assumptions. So the Scott Everett's paradox was really one based upon assumptions, and in which this idea of like, he assumed that it was going to be a long time. He assumed that the programmers didn't have any time. And in some ways he assumed that what he needed wasn't as important as what other people needed. Mm-hmm. And I think the big thing about being a manager, and whether it's in the game industry or probably anything, is not to assume things, to ask questions. Mm-hmm. Again, that's the advice, I'm giving and trying to help guide this this new manager, for her to see that, that's the thing. It's I say it sometimes, it's okay to be the dumbest person in the room. And if you just go with that, I always talk also about like the thing of, I use the example of, we did a South Park game with, Matt and Trey from South Park, and Trey Parker, Matt Stone. I always get their names mixed up sometimes. And Trey, the way Trey would always introduce something into the room sometimes, so, well, here's a stupid idea. And he did that purposely, because what he was trying to say is like, here's something to think about. It's probably not the thing we're even going to do. But he also makes it then easy for for there to be a conversation about it, because he himself is saying it's stupid. Which also means that Trey doesn't, even though Trey probably is the smartest person in the room at all times, what he's also suggesting is that he doesn't know everything, and he's okay with that. And I think that's the other thing that, is helpful, is that, there's not this, like, I don't have this need to be the smartest person in the room. I just want us to get a good result. And that's, that sometimes is a hard thing for people in the game industry to accept. But I think the people that are the most successful, are kind of get that. It's just about, what are we trying to accomplish? Not whether I know it or not.
I mean, yeah, for sure. I mean, I was actually just watching a talk with Reggie Fils-Aimé, who I'm sure you know, and he was saying that in his business strategy at Nintendo, one of the most important things was to keep an open mind and accept that you are not going to be the smartest person in the room most of the time, and always be open to some kind of opportunity or, some kind of new idea that someone could give you. And that was one of the most important things that he adopted as a mindset in business that helped him at Nintendo.
Yep.
And so aside from those kinds of attitude-based things and how you deal with things in industry, I'm wondering, why did you choose to be an independent developer?
Because I didn't know better. No. I think, this goes back to, it was the mindset that we sort of, if you were in the game industry in the early 90s and you worked for a publisher, the concept was you just, that's what you were going to do. Like, you know what I mean? Everyone just understood. I mean, that the hope was, that the idea was that eventually you just go out and create your developer, because that's what a lot of people did. I mean, that's where, that's where Interplay and Blizzard came from. So the guys who started Interplay and the guys who started Blizzard used to all work, or a number of them worked at the same company. I can't remember them. It wasn't Bob Davidson. No, that was a different thing. They worked at a company together. So Alan Adham and Brian Fargo and I think maybe Pat White and Jay Patel and a number of people, Troy Worrell. Anyway, so they worked for someone else, and then that was their trajectory. And so for us, it was the same thing. I mean, it was, could I have gone, was the industry more established in Orange County in the early 2000s? And could I have gotten a job at other places? Yeah, I could have at that point. But I felt, in the end, I guess I felt we had something to offer. We were making role-playing games. I still love making role-playing games. And so, we already felt we were known for doing that. And so it just seemed like we had the things that we needed to do to start a developer. And so that's a part of why. I mean, I wanted to be able to make games. I wanted to make games with that group of people. And in the end, maybe I didn't think about it too much, and maybe that was the right thing, was just to kind of do a little bit more of a leap, like a little bit of a leap before we completely looked at everything. But we did definitely do some looking, and we felt it was, I personally felt, we had an opportunity, and we didn't, I don't know if it was in that talk in Krakow, but I've said in other talks in which, if I had not done it, because I was 33 or coming up on 33 when I was really considering it, even if it didn't do it at 33 at that point, I don't know if I ever would do it. And so it felt like, it needed to be done. If we were going to do it, it needed to be then.
Do you think it's something that like overall, do you think it is a good decision that you did this and that you were able to see like, you know, your creative endeavors fulfilled as much as you'd like, and you wouldn't be able to do that as well if you were under a publishing company?
I don't know. I mean, because all the things we were successful at, you know, prior to Obsidian, we were under a publishing company, you know, so it is different. I mean, I think the thing is that the days of the days of how things worked back at Interplay and when I was running Black Owl Studios and the opportunity that Brian Fargo gave us, I think it might have even been fairly unique back then, but I mean, but it would be much more unique now. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know. I feel like if, let's say, I'd gone because I knew the guys who ran Blizzard pretty well, and if I had not decided, I mean, I don't know if they would have hired me, but I have a pretty good feeling they would have hired me back in 2003. Mm-hmm. You know, and I mean, my trajectory probably would have been different. I probably would have probably become, you know, an executive producer there, running a business unit, you know, and you know, or yeah, something. I mean, that's probably what would have happened, because you know, I know back then, you know, Mike had a pretty good, you know, Mike had a lot of faith in me even back then, and so yeah, so I guess my trajectory would have been different from the standpoint of I don't know that I would have run a company. I probably would have run a brand, or I would have run a large project. Wherever I would have gone, and I probably would have gone, if I was at a larger publisher, I probably would have ended up more in more management than probably as still connected to the games as I am today. Which, if you ask me my preference is to be more attached to games than just being pure management.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's something that I've heard with a lot of folks in the game industry, of course.
Yeah.
You know, you climb up the ladder, but then you look back down and you're like, I'd rather be doing the things down there, but someone has to do the, you know, the studio head manager, for example.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So from what you're saying, how much of your work has exactly been the, you know, hands-on kind of, you know, game development, or like as you were doing playtesting early on, before it became, you know, more of like producer, manager, more overhead
type stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think the thing is I mean, it's kind of gone in waves. I would say that, you know, early on, you know, when I was first a producer, I was just learning about games, you know, and I definitely contributed, but I was still a producer that was predominantly working on external games. And so when you're an external producer, you know, I was working with Blizzard. I was working with what's the name of that company? I can't remember the name of the developer now, but I was working on a lot of products with external developers, and you know, at that point you really are a project manager, you know. And in sort of the early to mid 90s, a lot of us, particularly at Interplay, I mean, we had so many games that we were focused on that we couldn't really do much real game work, and a lot of it, like I said, we were still really learning the industry. You know, as I got more into, like, let's say a couple of years after I was a producer, particularly, I think one of the first ones was actually on Shattered Steel, which was working with BioWare. And I ended up, their development team was super small back then. It was like 10 people maybe, and working on this mech game. And, you know, I like wrote all the dialogue for the cutscenes. I'm not an artist by any stretch of the means, but I think I sketched out using stick figures the sort of what am I trying to say? The layout of the cutscenes. Then we hired someone internally at Interplay to do the cutscenes for BioWare. So I managed that. I managed the audio and I managed the QA. So I managed a lot of this other stuff, and I was up and back to BioWare quite a bit. You know, and then, you know, as kind of time went on, as the, you know, then you know, got into the Fallouts. I did a fair amount of design work on Fallout 1. I was lead designer on Fallout 2. But after Fallout 2, I would say that, you know, there were other people that could do a lot. I mean, I had more stronger managers now to manage those teams. And so, you know, so I think I kind of went back to really being more of the overall manager. And then when we started Obsidian, you know, my job was business development. So that's signing contracts, managing publisher relationships. And so I think since then, early on in like Star Wars Knights Republic 2, I was the technical designer, which means, all the stuff that artists and in some cases what designers made, I actually would like take their raw stuff and get it into the build. And that was so kind of game work, kind of janitor work. But it was still, it was still actually actively involved with the games. Anyway, long story short, so pretty much since then, I've really not gotten my hands into games. I have managed games directly. I've sometimes managed parts of games directly, but I have not even done that. I would say probably for about how long? Probably about 3 or 4 years. And really my entire job for the last 3 or 4 years has been the business of Obsidian, which is the games, but it's the games management at a very high level.
Yeah. I'm just curious, what exactly did you do as a lead designer for Fallout 2?
So lead designer for Fallout 2. So I designed some of the areas. I managed the designers. I sort of guided the story. I really probably functioned more as a game director, but it's always a real questionable thing when you have game directors often function as lead designers. If there's a lead designer, that lead designer may function slightly different than on a product where there's not a game director. So yeah, I mean that's so then I mean sort of also like I would say halfway through I promoted another designer to be like the co-lead designer, and he kind of got into more sort of the nuts and bolts of the systems, and I focused more on sort of like how this like the story and the flow of the areas was all coming together, and then I worked with each of the individual designers. But there was like one area. There was a few areas that I actually worked on more closely. That then, just because of the busyness of everything, were finished up by other designers. But yeah, I did kind of what lead designers do nowadays, which is not so much actual like hands-on in an editor making things, but more managing other designers more closely than I would normally have done running a division or running a studio.
So one thing I'm getting is that things in the game industry tend to be, very fluid, and whoever has the skills needed for any kind of task will rise up or move to a different area if it's needed. And something I've always been curious about is, do you think that the game industry will eventually stabilize a bit more if, for example, the software is, I forget exactly what it's called, if there's one like common software that everyone uses or something like that, or do you think that is going to be very difficult for the industry to find or for that to happen? I probably addressed a couple different things. So, I'll answer the first thing very directly. So I don't think the industry is ever going to stabilize more than it's constantly stabilizes and unstabilizes from a standpoint of development tools and the way we make games. Sorry, from the standpoint of development tools and technology. The reason being is because everyone has the expectation, particularly, with games, that they are the next best thing. They're pushing the hardware as much as they can. I mean, we're always pushing, we have games are this odd thing in which they're both creative and they're technology. And that means you have creative people wanting the most, and you have technology that's creating challenges. And so we're always just riding the bleeding edge of it, because because we want to give players the best experience that we can. And we always want to be improving upon and there's an expectation, it's like, I don't know, does the second Star Wars movie need to be more technologically advanced than the first Star Wars movie? No, I mean, they're talking about characters and story and plot and all that kind of stuff. And as long as the CG is, up to the same level and things like that, no one's talking about, now it uses ray casting, where in the game industry, that's just what it is. So
I mean, that's always going to create a disruptive force in our ability to sort of not have sort of tumultuous times in making games. Now, I do think the thing that we do get better and better at every generation or every game, and that's why I like shipping games, because I love shipping games as frequently as we can, just because we learn so much every time, and it creates this period of reflection. But also, it's this thing. I think that as time goes on, we get better at managing it. We understand more about how to help people, help creative people, get the most without causing projects that are like in free fall or just in a bad place. That doesn't mean that we don't get projects in a bad place. We do, because again, it has to do with a lot of just creative people wanting to do awesome things. And often we often jump into projects with too many unknowns, and that's something we're trying to be better and better about. And I think we are. And I mean, it really goes back to like, in the early 90s when you were going to have max 20 people on a team, and that was a big team. Like you could sort of have a lot of unknowns because there's still the amount of technology you're creating was not great. And you could kind of, all get it together at the end, where when you have teams 100, 150 people, like if you're not really organized, there's no method to get the work of 150 people to work unless you've been organized about it. And so I don't know. I think that's really the way that I look at it. I look at like we're never gonna slay the technology beast, but I do feel that every year we get better at how we approach the beast, and how we organize our teams, and set expectations and set guidelines and specifications, and not to get too DoD about it, but I think that helps us. But there's a limit on that, because I'm also a big believer in like I don't want to create a 400-page design document because I don't think it's useful. And I think by the time you get in 6, you write it and then you try to hold to it, even though a lot of what we do when we're making games, we're learning about what we want the game to be. And if you set down this blueprint, everyone wants to follow it. Mm-hmm. And that can create failure because it's not taking into account what you're learning as you're moving forward.
So as for a slightly different question,
sure.
So for the game you worked on, Pillars of Eternity, in 2015,
mm-hmm.
I understand that you crowdfunded, I believe, over $4 million for the game, right?
Yeah.
And how was that process for you at Obsidian? And what roles exactly did you have in that crowdfunding?
Yeah, so we did we crowdfunded it. I think it was sort of I think it came out in September of 2012 was when we put it in. That was the year of crowdfunding for games, was 2012. And so we put put it up. We did about 4 million, very close. I mean, if you count like how other people gave us money, we made 4 million. And then by the time the game had come out, people had given us a total of like 5.2 million. Mm-hmm. No, I mean, the process was, I guess a lot of it was, we went up, people, like we knew the product. People knew we knew the product we wanted to make. It was a product that people had not seen in a while, and so they wanted it. And there was really two. As Josh Sawyer and Adam Brennicky really kind of started the charge on that while I was sort of busy in other stuff. And then I came in more closely, probably in the last few weeks before it went up, and I kind of was working with them on it quite a bit. And then all of us were just learning like what is like how do you even manage all of this. But I think we were lucky in that we've always had a really strong tie to our community, going all the way back to Fallout 1, where we put these forums up for Fallout 1, I think in 1994 and 1995, using like one of the first pieces of like original forum software that like didn't even have the concept of like pages of threads. So like you had to like manually go into the HTML and like copy the what people had said into other pages of HTML, so there would actually be pages. It was like super, it was so bad. So we were managing, that and people were so interested in Fallout back then that and so we just kind of over so many years, it's about talking to the community, and that's really what crowdfunding is. It's just managing expectations. It's not being it's being optimistic and excited, but not overly promise things. But it's not being like negative and saying like, yeah, all we can do is create a rock, because we all know how to create rocks. Yeah. And I think that was what it was. And it was a blend of like, I think we had a lot of personalities. I'm often the pusher of like, I think we can do this. I think we can do this. And I'm usually right, but not always. And so, and it was this, and really what crowdfunding was, and it's what I always tell people, it is a campaign, and is this day-to-day reaction to what people are saying and how much they're talking and how you interact with them, and how do you get, how do you just give, like, what would be exciting to people? What would they like to hear about the product? What kind of rewards would they want to see? Do they like cloth maps? Do they listen? So it is we basically had almost like a war room. We just had we had this lounge. We had two 4x8 whiteboards on two walls, and we just planned out like every day about like all the different things we could talk about and different things we could offer and things we needed to figure out. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I managed it a lot. I did a lot of the talking to people. I would get up on the Kickstarter site and into the comments page, which ended up being like a chat. And I would just be up there for like, 3 hours a night. More like 3 or 4 hours a night. So I could talk to people at different time zones. Mm-hmm. And so I did that. And then, coming out of the crowdfunding, I just worked with Adam and Josh. They handled the product. I handled the, how are we going to get funding for the rest of it? How are we going to, how are we going to get the distribution? How are we going to put all the rewards together? So yeah, on the crowdfunding thing, I was a big part of the actual campaign, and then my responsibility was more the business side of it afterwards.
So do you find that feeling of crowdfunding is a lot more freeing than working for a publisher? Or do you think at its core it's kind of the same fundamental thing?
No, I think it's very different. And it's very different because, for a couple things. One, if you're not just looking for a small amount of your money, like for us, we got a vast majority of the money that we needed for Pillars. So we were able to, the company could just fund the rest. We didn't end up we didn't need to sign any contracts for more money for anybody else. And so what that meant is like, we could make good decisions every day about what we felt the product should be. The challenge often working with a publisher on milestones is that, and this is not every publisher, and we've had publishers where this wasn't an issue. Mm-hmm. But you have a lot of situations where publishers where you have to deliver products according to in some ways the way that they want to see it delivered. And then you have these milestones that were maybe set in stone 12 or 18 months ago. And the product has actually changed, but you're trying to deliver these milestones, and then you're trying to come up with new milestones. And then what we do, like particularly on Pillars, like we just constantly, like there were certain things we did say we were going to deliver to our fans, right? So that, like, we weren't going to change like the number of companions and the number of races and things like that. But a lot of the other stuff it was fluid. Our job is to deliver an awesome game. It's not like that that there's spotted weasels, like who cares, And so, but with a publisher, you often are held to much more specifics, and it's very much harder to sort of make decisions on a day-to-day basis about how you can fluidly make the game. And then there's just a lot of other requirements. And that just makes it harder. Now, that doesn't mean, I mean, how do you plan for that? Well, in some ways, I mean, I guess how we, not that we were ever really to do this a great job, but I would almost tell people like, well, if you're going to work with a publisher, you kind of have to look, there has to be like a 20-30% overhead of things that are just going to happen that are going to require changes in the product that no one's going to want to pay for. So you just have to plan for that ahead of time. And on top of that, you also need a person like that his just job is to manage the publisher. And do all the requests that the publisher has. And that sounds like, that comes off as almost saying that there's publishers are dumb and things like that. Our relationship with Take-Two was great. Private Division, on the Outer Worlds. I mean, yeah, there was definitely things they wanted to see, but they were not wrong in in almost everything that they wanted to see in the product. And so, like I said, it's easier, but I think also you can see the flip side of it is of like you give some people a big pile of money, I mean, and with no oversight from a publisher, and I mean they're just as capable of flushing it down a toilet, as a publisher screwing it up, right? So, it really comes down to the people, the time, what you're trying to accomplish, and if you're all trying to be reasonable. Now me, I think, and I'm fairly biased because I think that I think we're pretty reasonable and we want to ship games. And so I think if we just had like money, then at this point in our sort of maturity as a developer, like that works better for us.
So out of all of these games that you worked on, whether they've been crowdfunded or, under a publisher, has there been one project that you were the most proud of or one that was most notable for you, or even the one that was most challenging that you felt like you overcame something while you were working on it?
So the question, so basically, was there a challenge on a product that we overcame? That was kind of what you were saying?
Yeah.
Geez. I mean, every product has these. I mean, what's a specific instance? I mean, if you take something like Fallout New Vegas, that's a little too. I'm trying to think like what's a good example. Let's say South Park. So South Park. So one of the things with South Park, because this is something I was directly involved in, like myself personally. So one of the things when we were working on South Park, Matt and Trey they had different ideas and they were also super busy. And so we get their time here and there. And they definitely, Trey had ideas for what he wanted out of the game. And for them, a lot of it is the premise was it was just a bunch of kids playing this game, like they were playing a LARP. And it wasn't meant to be supernatural, and this kind of stuff. So we were always being challenged by this idea of like, well, how do we create combat abilities and all this kind of stuff? And so combat. I mean, we were going back and forth. We'd gone different visions and all this other kind of stuff. And I wouldn't say the product was in jeopardy, but the product was not in a great place. And Matt and Trey were busy and sort of unhappy. And I think. I don't remember if this was exactly when this was. It's possible, THQ. We were in this period of time where Ubisoft had just taken over and they were trying to get it shipped, and everyone was looking at us. Why hadn't we got the game done? So it was this kind of like not wonderful period. And I was remember looking at combat, and I was like, okay, and everyone was up in arms about combat. I said, so this is where I did like come in and I started to manage the combat strike team, and. We're going back and forth and Trey definitely wanted this idea of farts having some magical effects and we were doing this and everyone was like up against a wall because we can't do this. We can't make it magical. We can't make it. And I and at one point I just said, you know what? Screw it. like we're not going to make it like crazy over the top JRPG like stuff, but yeah, we're going to in normal combat do bigger, cooler effects and animations and we're just going to do it. And they're like, whoa, and I'm going to just, no, look, we're just going to do it, and we did it. And we went up there and I sat down with Matt and Trey and I said, okay, here it is. I'm warning you, it is not what you told us to do. Right. And I said, because I feel it feels better by us using bigger, more of graphic effects, bigger animations for combat. Here, play it for half an hour. Tell me what you think afterwards. And I have to give them credit. I mean, they played. I left the room. They played. I came back in. And they said you're right. It's a lot better. And so I don't know. I'm proud of that. I'm proud of like kind of just not just we were stuck, and I was proud of getting us unstuck.
Yeah, that's an interesting story for sure. I just have one last question. Is there any game that you would like to create with infinite resources and time before you die?
Well, I think the first thing is I do not want infinite resources. I would like someone to give me a fair amount of resources and time to create something. The reason being is I always go back and I think we're all, because we're all human, and if there's a donut on the table, we want to eat it, even though we shouldn't, or at least that's one of my problems. And I think that when you have infinite resources and infinite time, you have no reason to ever make something. There needs to be a box. There needs to be stress. And I don't mean crazy stress, because I know as you first started talking, you were talking about tumultuous times and a lot of stuff in the industry and stuff like that. And I probably have a kind of a different perspective on that. I feel like, Obsidian has gone through a lot of things, but I think we've worked really hard to have that be something where I can't say it's been perfect for everybody, but I would say that we worked very hard for people to not have to work on work crunch, to work on things that they wanted to work on. I think we need to mentor people better, provide more mentorship and more ways to improve themselves and things like that. But we still work on it and we think about it. And I think in a lot of places, if you interviewed a lot of other developers, there's of course the horror stories that are in the press. But I think if you actually, if I of course know a lot of the people who run studios and things like that, and I think that there's another story there that doesn't get talked about. But anyway, so for myself, but I only say that from the standpoint of like I do believe that there needs to be stress, but stress not in the way that gets talked about, on the websites and stuff. Anyway, so what would I make? So I grew up playing role-playing games, tabletop and CRPG and console and all that, and so and the game that I would make, I love Shadowrun. I just think it's a cool, I love, urban fantasy. Not so much the vampire romance aspect of urban fantasy, because that's it used to be urban fantasy was kind of one thing, and then sort of the vampire romance sort of seems to have taken over much of urban fantasy. Sometimes when I'm looking for books on Netflix, my wife will go, what books are you looking at? I'm trying to find the ones that don't have covers like this. Anyway, there's series that I really like, that I think could be sort of this, in my head, it's like, if you do CD Projekt's, of course, coming out with Cyberpunk, and and how could you do that with elves and dwarves, and I thought there was glimmers of coolness in that Will Smith Netflix thing, Bright, I think. I think there was that on that movie, and so there was there's some cool concepts in there. I think the execution was a little up and down, but yeah, that's what I would do. Is I would want to tell a story in that sort of world, and I don't know why. It's something resonated with me when I was a kid playing Shadowrun First Edition. I guess I wasn't a kid. That didn't come out until I was, I think, 19. But I don't know. And for me, what does that mean? It means I want to put people this is what I still love about making role playing is putting people in these worlds. There's those scenes in Blade Runner where it just it feels like you go back and you look at it and you're like, this movie that was made in 1983, and you look at certain scenes and you're like, that doesn't look like a movie. I mean, it does, but it doesn't look like a movie from 1983. I'd love to make a game that feels that way. It feels like you're in this sort of this world that's our world, but somewhat alternate as well. and you just feel like you're in it, and it goes back to what we do at Obsidian every day. It's not I want to do not that I want to do something totally different, but it's where you are making is letting people play in this world and be who they want to be. And I think that's what's the amazing thing about being a game maker is you let people take that, separate themselves from their lives for a moment, because all of our lives are not always, perfectly wonderful at one point in time. But when we can put people in this world and let them be who they want to be and escape, that's what I love to do, and that's what I would do, but in that kind of world, if I had a very large check and a good amount of time to do it.
Yeah, for sure. Is it this kind of like cyberpunk kind of aesthetic, I guess is another word for it?
It is the cyberpunk. It's the cyberpunk aesthetic. Yeah, it's the I don't know. It's the.
I mean, I can kind of see it in Fallout New Vegas, for example.
Yeah. I mean, it's this even it is, and oddly, there is a Japanese influence to it, which has always interested me, and so but it's sort of it's like a darker. I mean, cyberpunk will probably be pretty dark, and I don't mean it is sort of like if you sort of took Blade Runner and Lord of the Rings and smashed it together. I think it'd be cool. Like how to create that would be cool.
That's really interesting. Yeah, it reminds me of I don't know if you've ever been to Tokyo, but some parts of Tokyo have this kind of urban techie, like extreme futuristic, almost urban techie feel to it. I don't know if you've ever been there, but
I'm not. It was funny because like back at people go to Tokyo Game Show all the time, and our games have gone to Tokyo Game Show, but just either due to actually a couple times just due to scheduling I couldn't go, and then when I was back at Interplay, just we mostly worked on PC games, and Tokyo Game Show is mostly about console, and so I never got a chance to go. It's hopefully in the next couple of years that's one of the places I get to go.
Yeah, definitely interesting stuff. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. So, thank you, Feargus.
All right, have a good rest of the day.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.